Before we dive into heart-pounding dog stories, please subscribe to my channel. Many people watch videos without subscribing. Your one subscription helps me to create stories like this, and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. If Bandit hadn't barked that day, Paige might still be locked in silence. It wasn't just any bark. It was the kind that slices through noise. That makes adults freeze. And children drop their crayons. The kind that says, "Something's wrong. Here, look closer." It happened on a warm Wednesday morning. At Haven Ridge Elementary. Just before recess. The school was buzzing with excitement. Today was safety day. Local police officers brought their K-9 units to show the students how dogs like Bandit help find missing people and catch bad guys. Everything was going smoothly. The kids loved petting the well-trained German shepherds, giggling as the dogs demonstrated how they sniffed out hidden objects or took down padded decoys. Officer Sophie Hale, Bandit's handler, had done this dozens of times before. But no one expected what happened when Paige rolled by. She was quiet as always. 8 years old. Small for her age. Pale. Her wheelchair made almost no sound. Across the hallway tiles, her aunt, a woman in her 50s, with cropped gray hair and a heavy perfume, was pushing her, smiling tightly at the officers. Bandit's ears perked up. His stance stiffened. Then, all at once, he lunged. "Bandit, no." Sophie held back hard on his leash. The German shepherd bared his teeth and barked in rapid, sharp bursts. His tail was rigid, hackles raised. He wasn't just excited. He was alert, insistent, even desperate. Every time the woman tried to will Paige away, Bandit surged forward, barking louder. Gasps filled the hallway. Kids stared. A few teachers stepped in, unsure whether to intervene or just trust the dog. Sophie managed to pull Bandit to the side. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, glancing at the child. "He never acts like this unless..." The woman snapped. "He must not like wheelchairs. Happens all the time." But Sophie wasn't so sure. Bandit had been around dozens of people in wheelchairs, including Sophie's own father. He never reacted like this. And when Paige's eyes met Bandit's, just for a second, Sophie swore she saw something. Not fear of the dog, but recognition. And something else. A silent plea. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. What do you think Bandit detected about Paige? Answer in the comments. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. She replayed the incident over and over. Something about the way Bandit refused to calm down. The way his bark turned guttural when the woman touched Paige's shoulder. It all gnawed at her. Bandit had never falsely alerted. In 5 years of service, he'd found drugs inside hollowed-out books, tracked fugitives through swamps, and even sniffed out a gas leak behind an old motel. He was more than a dog. He was her partner. Her intuition turned canine. And today, his instincts had locked onto an 8-year-old girl. But why? The next morning, Sophie made a decision. Before reporting for duty, she stopped by Haven Ridge Elementary again. She brought Bandit with her, of course. She told the front desk she'd forgotten a training marker during the demo. It was a flimsy excuse. But no one questioned her. Sophie and Bandit slowly walked the hall again, tracing their steps from yesterday. When they passed the spot where Paige had rolled by, Bandit stopped, sat, then whined. That wasn't part of any routine. He nosed the air and sniffed along the wall, then down toward the floor. His tail wagged slowly, uncertain, restrained, but his eyes stayed locked on Sophie. Something was still bothering him. Sophie crouched beside him. "You want me to follow up, don't you?" His tail thumped once hard. "Hey, if you're loving this mystery as much as we are, don't forget to hit that subscribe button." Later that afternoon, Sophie ran a quick background check. Paige Jennings, no parents listed. Legal guardian Donna Blake. Marked as a maternal aunt. Sophie dug deeper. No hospital records confirmed Paige's paralysis. No police report for the car accident. Donna claimed to have paralyzed the poor thing. No school records before 6 months ago. It was like Paige hadn't existed. Until recently. And something about Donna Blake's records didn't sit right either. 2 changes of address in the past year. A short stint working as an in-home nurse. Terminated for conduct unbecoming. A missing persons alert in a neighboring state. 3 years ago. Matched her photo under a different name. Sophie's pulse quickened. Could Paige be one of the hidden kids? Children taken in are not always for ransom, but for benefits or worse, control. That evening, she fed Bandit and watched him curl up on his bed near the kitchen table. He was restless, tail twitching in his sleep, like he was chasing something. Or maybe someone. She glanced at her phone. No calls from the school. No follow-ups. No red flags raised. Of course not. Because when a child is hidden well enough, they stop being a red flag. They become invisible. But not to Bandit. Never to Bandit. Sophie Hale had been in law enforcement long enough to know when something didn't add up. She trusted her gut. But even more than that, she trusted Bandit. And right now, every hair on his back said Paige Jennings was not okay. The problem was instinct alone. Didn't get you a warrant. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Sophie made her next move. She wasn't on the Paige case officially. There wasn't even a case yet. But that didn't mean she couldn't look around a little. She called the school's guidance counselor. A woman named Lisa Carter. Someone Sophie had worked with during a community event the previous year. "Lisa," Sophie said. Her voice was warm but firm. "I know this is unusual. But do you have a few minutes to talk about one of your students?" There was a pause on the line. "Depends on which student and what for." Sophie chose her words carefully. "Paige Jennings, I was there for the K-9 demo." Bandit reacted. "A big one." Another pause then. "Yeah." Lisa sighed. "I saw that. Surprised me, to be honest. That dog of yours seems like a good judge of character." Sophie smiled faintly. "He usually is." Lisa agreed to meet over coffee at the cafe down the street from the station. Sophie and Lisa sat in a booth near the window. Lisa, a woman in her mid-50s, with kind eyes and calloused hands from a lifetime of comforting others, brought out a manila folder. "I'm not supposed to show you this," she said under her breath. "But something's been bothering me, too." She pulled out a simple child's drawing. Sophie's breath caught. It was done in crayon. Uneven lines. And innocent colors. But it sent chills down her spine. A little girl stood in the middle of a field. She was walking. Not in a wheelchair. Behind her, a tall woman held a leash, dragging something small, and hunched over. The woman's face was scribbled red. "What is this supposed to be?" Sophie asked. "She told me it's just a made-up story. Said she was playing pretend. But I asked her about the girl walking. And she whispered, 'That's who I used to be.'" Lisa leaned in. She said she still dreams about walking. That her legs work in the dreams. Sophie stared at the drawing again. "Is that a dog being dragged?" Lisa nodded. "That's what I thought." But she wouldn't say. Just shut down completely. Sophie's mouth went dry. "Does she have any bruises? Marks? Anything unusual?" Lisa hesitated. Then opened the next sheet. A health incident report. Nurse documented a circular bruise on her lower back 2 weeks ago. Claimed she fell off her chair. I filed it. But without any real evidence. You know how these things. Sophie knew all too well. Without bruises in the right places. Without photos. Without medical confirmation. It was just a report in a drawer. Forgotten. But Bandit hadn't forgotten. That night, Sophie fed Bandit his usual kibble, and sat on the floor beside him. His eyes followed her movements. Calm but alert. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered, stroking his fur. "You knew she was being hurt." He licked her hand once. That was enough. The next morning, Sophie filed a formal welfare concern with the Department of Child Safety, citing reasonable suspicion based on Paige's inconsistent medical history, behavior, and known caregiver instability. But the case would take time. So she planned something faster. That Friday, the police department hosted a community safety Q&A at Haven Ridge Elementary. Sophie volunteered, bringing Bandit along. But this time she asked if she could visit individual classrooms to talk about how canines protect people in danger. When they reached Paige's classroom, Sophie was careful. She kept it light, letting Bandit do tricks, letting the kids ask questions. Then she knelt beside Paige's desk and asked gently, "Would you like to pet him again?" Paige nodded faintly. Bandit approached slowly and rested his head on her knee. Paige's hand trembled as she reached forward. But then she pulled something from her pocket. A folded piece of paper. She slid it under Bandit's collar. When no one was looking, Sophie noticed. She didn't say a word. Back at the car, Sophie retrieved the note. 4 words written in shaky childlike print. "Help me, she lies." Sophie stared at it, heart pounding. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was a cry for help. Saturday morning, Sophie knocked on the door of a trailer home parked on the edge of town. Donna Blake opened the door, still in her bathrobe. "Officer," she said coolly. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to check in after the demo at the school." Paige seemed a little off. "Just making sure she's all right." Donna narrowed her eyes. "She's fine. Just tired a lot. Her condition makes her weak." Sophie glanced past her shoulder. "Mind if I say hi?" "Actually, we're in the middle of breakfast." From inside, a loud thud, followed by silence. Sophie's expression darkened. "Ma'am, I need to see the child." Donna's smile vanished. "Without a warrant, I don't think so. I have a welfare concern filed." With Child Protective Services. If you refuse, I'll return with backup. And probable cause. Donna hesitated. Then stepped aside. Inside was cluttered. Musty. Paige sat in her chair at the table. Eyes downcast. Her lips moved as if silently. Rehearsing what to say. Sophie crouched beside her. Hey, sweetheart, you remember me? Paige nodded faintly. Bandits in the car. He asked about you. Paige looked up at that. Her first real spark. Did you write the note? Sophie whispered. Paige's lips trembled. But she nodded. Donna stepped closer. But Sophie stood. Blocking her. I'm going to have a medic check her. You're not to interfere. Donna's mouth opened to argue. Then froze as she saw Bandit. He was standing at the doorframe now. Sophie hadn't called him in. He'd come on his own. His body tensed. His ears pinched. And when Donna moved, even a step forward, he growled low and deep. The medics arrived within the hour. Paige was removed from the home and taken to the hospital. Initial tests confirmed Sophie's fear. High levels of lidocaine in her system. A numbing agent. She hadn't been paralyzed by an accident. She'd been drugged systematically. Repeatedly. Likely for years. Donna Blake was taken into custody. When interrogated, she confessed to using the child to collect donations and medical benefits. No one questions a sweet little girl in a wheelchair, she said coldly. They would now. At the hospital, Paige lay in a clean bed. Finally safe. A therapist spoke to her softly. As Sophie and Bandit entered, Paige's face lit up. When she saw them. Is he really my hero? She asked. Sophie smiled. No, he's our hero. Bandit walked to her bedside. Curled up beside her feet. And just for a moment closed his eyes. He had found her. And he wasn't leaving again. 3 days after Paige was removed from Donna Blake's home, she took her first unaided step. It was shaky. Just 1 foot sliding forward. From the hospital bed to the tile floor. But when the physical therapist saw it, she stopped mid-sentence and dropped her clipboard. Paige flinched. Hey, the therapist said gently, kneeling beside her. It's okay. I'm just surprised in a good way. Paige looked down at her feet. Like she didn't quite believe they were real. Like she dreamed about them moving for so long. The fact that they obeyed now felt like a trick. She tried again. Another step. Her knees wobbled. But they held. Outside the glass door, Officer Sophie Hale watched the moment in silence. Arms crossed over her chest. Heart caught somewhere between relief and heartbreak. Next to her, Bandit sat still. Ears perked. Watching Paige. The way only a dog with too much wisdom in his eyes could. She's walking, Sophie whispered. Bandit's tail thumped once on the tile. That afternoon, Sophie sat in the small conference room of the hospital's pediatric ward. Paige's new social worker, a woman named Taylor Brooks, clicked her pen nervously. As they reviewed the case file, Sophie could tell Taylor was new to the job. Too careful with her wording. Too hopeful in her eyes. I'm recommending temporary foster care while we look for any possible family connections, Taylor said. But so far, Donna's statement hasn't led to anything useful. Sophie flipped through the medical notes. And her real identity Still unknown. Donna admitted she falsified the guardianship documents years. Said she found Paige during a housing shuffle after a fire in Arizona. Taylor shook her head. We're checking into possible missing children matches. Sophie tapped her finger against a highlighted section of the file. You know, she said slowly, if she'd never put her in that chair, she might have stayed invisible forever. Taylor nodded. That chair became a costume. And Paige, just the prop in the show. Later that evening, Sophie visited Paige's hospital room alone. Paige was awake, sitting up with a notebook in her lap. She had started drawing again. This time, a forest scene. It was surprisingly detailed for someone her age. The way the light came through the trees, the shading on the leaves. One corner of the page was empty, though, like something had been erased. Hey, Sophie said softly. You're getting really good at that. Paige smiled just barely. Sophie sat down beside her. You know, we're trying to find out where you came from, who your real family is. Paige's hands tensed around the pencil. Her eyes didn't lift from the page. Sophie waited. Then Paige whispered. I had a mom. Sophie nodded slowly. Do you remember her name? Paige shook her head. Just her singing. She used to sing to me at night. I think it was a song about stars. What else? Her hair was dark. And she smelled like cinnamon. Sophie's eyes softened. That's something. We can start there. Paige finally looked up. Do you think she's still out there? I don't know. Sophie answered honestly. But I think someone out there loves you. And we're going to try to find them. Paige nodded. Then unexpectedly, she reached down and laid a small crumpled photo on the bed. Sophie picked it up. It was old. Faded. A snapshot taken from the back of a crowd. Maybe a festival. Maybe a fair. In the center was a woman. With long, dark hair. Holding a little girl. Who looked no older than 4. The little girl had Paige's eyes. Sophie's chest tightened. Where did you get this? She asked. Paige shrugged. It was in the lining of my coat. I think I hid it from her. Sophie held the photo. Like it was glass. They had a lead. The next morning, Sophie turned the photo over to Taylor and a missing persons analyst. By noon, the image had been enhanced. The woman's face run through every available database. At 3:14 p.m., a hit came back. Sarah Ramirez, last seen 4 years ago. Age 28 at the time. Reported missing after a domestic dispute. In Tucson. The report said she had a daughter. Olivia, age 4. Paige's birth name was likely Olivia Ramirez. Sophie exhaled slowly. She's been missing 4 years. Taylor looked stunned. And no one found her. Because no one was looking. Sophie replied. They thought she'd vanished into the system. They didn't know someone had rewritten her story. That evening, Sophie returned to the hospital. She didn't say anything at first. Just sat next to Paige. And handed her the newly printed photo. Do you remember this woman's name? She asked gently. Paige stared at the photo. Her bottom lip trembled. Then in the softest voice. Mommy. Sophie's throat tightened. We think we know who she is. Her name is Sarah Ramirez. Paige's eyes filled. But she didn't cry. Is she alive? We don't know yet. But we're going to find out. The search began. Sophie and the local authorities in Arizona reopened the cold case. It took only 48 hours to confirm what they'd feared. Sarah had been found deceased in a riverbank weeks after her disappearance. Foul play suspected. No convictions ever made. Donna Blake, it turned out, had been living in Arizona at the time. Had volunteered at shelters during the fire recovery efforts. She had seen Sarah and Paige together at a temporary shelter. And one night, both were gone. Except Donna had only taken one of them. Sophie debated how to tell Paige. In the end, she didn't have to. Paige was a quiet child, but not a foolish one. When Sophie came in with a heavy expression, Paige simply said, "She's gone, isn't she?" Sophie sat beside her and nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She didn't leave you. She didn't want to. You need to know that." Paige held the photo against her chest. Her body trembled. Bandit nudged her hand with his nose, then rested his head gently in her lap. "I remember her singing," Paige whispered. "I remember she said I was her star." "You still are," Sophie said. "And you're safe now." That night, Sophie stared at the ceiling above her bed, thinking of all the kids that slipped through cracks like Paige. Olivia had. She looked over at Bandit, curled up near the door. "You did it," she whispered. His ears twitched. He never needed words. For the first time in years, Paige Ramirez, formerly known as Paige Jennings, had a room of her own. It wasn't large. Just a small guest room at the edge of a modest home in a quiet Arizona suburb. But it had something she'd never truly had before. A locked door she could control. A window that opened to real sunlight, not a parking lot. And a foster mom who made pancakes shaped like smiley faces. Her new guardian, Hannah Pierce, was in her early 40s and worked from home as a freelance illustrator. She had no children of her own, but her house was full of color, art supplies, handmade quilts, a bookcase that leaned slightly to the left. There were also 2 cats who stared at Bandit like he was a lion dropped into their kingdom. Bandit didn't mind. He took his spot on the rug by Paige's bed, watching her as she finally tentatively played again. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the truth came out. 3 weeks of therapy, of court dates, of piecing together the story Donna Blake had tried to erase. The police ruled Sarah Ramirez's death a homicide. But the trail was cold. The evidence too old. Donna remained behind bars, awaiting sentencing for kidnapping, fraud, and child endangerment. And Paige, she was trying to learn what it meant to exist, not survive. But even safety has shadows. It began on a Monday afternoon. Paige was in the driveway, sketching the 2 neighborhood dogs, playing fetch. Hannah had invited Officer Sophie over for coffee, and Bandit was curled at her feet, under the porch swing. Suddenly, Bandit lifted his head, then stood. His ears pointed toward the far end of the street. Sophie followed his gaze. There, half a block down, a man in a gray hoodie stood perfectly still. He wasn't looking at any house in particular, but his head tilted slightly, like he was listening. Sophie squinted. "Hannah, do you know him?" Hannah stepped out from the porch. "No, he's not from around here." Paige, sensing the tension, looked up, and followed their eyes. The man turned and walked away. Not fast, but with purpose. Bandit growled once. Low, quiet. Enough to raise every hair on Sophie's arm. Later that night, after Paige went to bed, Sophie asked Hannah for the home security feed. The camera on the driveway caught the figure clearly. Medium height. Slim build. Hood pulled low. Face turned just enough to avoid identification. But Sophie noticed something else. He hadn't just passed by. He'd stopped. He'd watched Paige for a full 23 seconds. And his hands. They hadn't been in his pockets. One held a phone. The other a small silver object. A lighter. The next day, Sophie filed a report. She couldn't prove intent. The man hadn't trespassed. Hadn't spoken. But Sophie had been a cop long enough to recognize that stillness. The way predators waited. Just out of reach. Just beyond comfort. She requested patrols around Hannah's neighborhood. Installed a second camera near the fence. And she kept her phone volume on high at night. But she didn't tell Paige. Not yet. 2 days later, Paige had her first nightmare since moving in. Hannah found her in the hallway, curled up against the wall, crying quietly. Bandit lay beside her head, pressed against her chest. Sophie rushed over. After Hannah called, Paige looked up, her face pale. I remembered something. Sophie knelt beside her. What is it, sweetie? Paige wiped her nose with her sleeve. I remember the man who came to the shelter before Mommy disappeared. He wore a gray hoodie. Sophie's heart sank. Hannah whispered. You think it's the same man? I think, Sophie said slowly. Someone's trying to finish what they started. Sophie pulled every record from the Sarah Ramirez case. Dug into associates, ex-boyfriends, distant relatives, anyone with a reason to harm her. And one name kept coming back. Victor Harlan, Sarah's ex. Long arrest record. Domestic abuse charges. Most of which were dropped when Sarah failed to appear in court. He disappeared the same week she did. And now Victor Harlan had an active warrant in Nevada for assault. Sophie sent the footage from Hannah's home to the FBI. They couldn't confirm it was Victor. But the build, the posture, even the habit of rubbing his left hand, noted in a previous arrest report. It all fit. The next move had to be careful. Sophie worked with Child Protection Services and the local police to plan a quiet relocation for Paige. A temporary safe house. Somewhere outside the city. Not forever. Just until they could confirm whether Victor was in the area. But Paige noticed the tension. One afternoon, she stood in the hallway, watching Sophie pack up some of Bandit's gear. Are we leaving? She asked softly. Sophie hesitated. Just for a few days somewhere safe. Because of the man. Sophie met her eyes. Yes. Paige took a shaky breath. Will Bandit come with us? Always, Sophie said, placing a hand on the dog's back. Wherever you go, he goes. The safe house was quiet. Out near the mountains. With a porch that creaked when you walked too fast. Paige spent her days drawing, watching birds, and asking Sophie questions she didn't always know how to answer. Do you think he's still watching me? Not anymore, Sophie would say. He won't get near you again. At night, Bandit would patrol the front and back doors. Silent and determined. Sophie started sleeping in a chair by the window. Badge on the table. Her sidearm within reach. Then on the fourth night, the perimeter alarm went off. 12 a.m. A motion sensor near the rear of the property. Sophie was on her feet in seconds. Bandit stood frozen. Every muscle in his body stiff. They moved together. Sophie crept to the back door. Bandit at her heel. There, just beyond the fence, a figure darted into the woods. Sophie didn't hesitate. She let Bandit go. He moved like lightning. A shadow among shadows. The figure tripped. Tried to scramble. Bandit lunged. His bark cutting through the trees. Within minutes, Sophie caught up. Gun drawn. Victor Harlan was on the ground. Blood on his face. Breathing hard. A knife laid just inches from his hand. Bandit stood over him. Teeth bared. Ready to strike again. Victor looked up, defeated. "She's not supposed to be alive," he whispered. Sophie lowered her weapon. Just enough to cuff him. "She is, and she's never going to be hurt again." Back at the cabin, Paige waited. With Hannah and another officer. When Sophie walked in, Bandit at her side, she simply nodded. Paige understood. And for the first time since Sarah's death, she slept through the night. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of Victor Harlan's arrest, local media picked up the story. K9 dog tracks down fugitive, rescues kidnapped girl. They didn't share Paige's real name. Her identity was protected. But they showed Bandit's photo. Proudly sitting beside Officer Sophie Hale. Tongue out. Tail curled around his feet. Like he knew he'd done something big. Paige watched the report. From the living room of the safe house. Curled up on the couch. With a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Bandit was of course lying right at her feet. Like he always did. When his face came on screen, Paige smiled. "That's my dog," she whispered. Sophie chuckled softly from the kitchen. "You know, I think he'd agree with you." Hannah, who was drying dishes at the sink, added, "I don't think I've ever seen a dog so connected to someone." Paige looked down at Bandit. Then reached out. And gently scratched behind his ears. "He listens to me. Even when I don't say anything." That week, the department held a small ceremony to honor Bandit. It wasn't a grand parade. Just something simple at the station. A few officers, city officials, and a group of school kids who brought drawings they'd made of Bandit and superhero capes. Paige wore a blue dress Hannah had picked out. And for the first time in public, she walked into the room. With no assistants. No chair. No crutches. Just her own 2 feet. She held Sophie's hand on one side. And Bandit's leash in the other. The moment was quiet but powerful. Bandit received a medal. One of those heavy gold-colored ones. That jingled when he moved. He didn't care about it, of course. But when Paige slipped it over his neck and kissed the top of his head, his tail wagged with a proud thump. Later, when a reporter asked Paige if she had anything she wanted to say, she took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. "I just want people to listen to kids who are quiet. Sometimes we can't say everything. But dogs like Bandit. They hear us anyway." No one in the room blinked. For a solid 10 seconds. Then the applause came loud and real. Back at the house, Paige found something. In the mailbox. That didn't have a return address. It was an envelope. Thick and creased. With her name written in messy handwriting. She brought it inside. And gave it to Sophie. Unsure what to do with it. Sophie opened it slowly. Reading the letter inside. With careful eyes. Then she froze. "What is it?" Paige asked. "It's from someone who knew your mom," Sophie said softly. "A woman named Betty Santos. She worked at the shelter with Sarah. Before everything happened." Sophie handed her the letter. And Paige read it slowly. Her lips moving with each word. "Dear Olivia, I don't know if you'll remember me. But your mom talked about you every single day. She called you her little star. She said when things got hard, all she had to do was hold your hand. And everything felt okay. After the fire, we were separated. I tried to find you both. But by the time I got back to the shelter, you were gone. I never stopped looking. When I saw the news about the dog, I just knew it had to be you. You're so brave. I know your mom would be proud. If you ever want to meet, I'd love to see you again. With love, Betty Torres." Paige folded the letter. And pressed it to her chest. "I remember her," she whispered. "She used to braid Mommy's hair. And she gave me pink jelly beans. When I had bad dreams." Sophie smiled. "Would you like to meet her?" Paige nodded. "I think Mommy would want that." The meeting with Betty happened. A few days later. At a quiet diner near town. Paige waited nervously in a booth. Sipping hot chocolate. When Betty walked in. A woman in her 60s. Hair pulled back in a tight bun. Eyes full of tears. Before she even reached the table, Paige stood without thinking. They hugged. No big speeches. No questions. Just arms around each other. In the soft whisper of, "You're safe now." Betty brought photos of Sarah. Ones Paige had never seen. One of Sarah laughing in a hammock. Another holding baby Paige at a beach. Their matching dark hair. Tangled in the wind. She loved the ocean, Betty said. Tears sliding down her cheeks. She always said when you got older, she'd take you there. Let you walk barefoot in the surf. Paige glanced at Bandit. Then back at Betty. "Maybe we can still go someday. You and me." Betty smiled through the tears. "I'd like that." That night, back at the house. Paige sat beside Hannah on the back porch. The stars bright above them. Sophie had gone home for the evening. But Bandit stayed behind. Lying on the deck near Paige's feet. "Do you think dogs believe in heaven?" Paige asked suddenly. Hannah turned. "I think if anyone knows what heaven feels like, it's them." Paige reached down. And ran her hand through Bandit's fur. "I think Mommy sent him," she said softly. "Like when I couldn't talk. He said the words for me." Hannah didn't answer right away. Then maybe she did. They sat there a while. The stars blinking gently above them. Paige leaned her head on Hannah's shoulder. "I'm not afraid anymore." Hannah placed an arm around her. "You don't have to be." Later that night, Paige placed the photo of her mom beside her bed. She opened her sketchbook. And started to draw. Not a forest or a street corner. Or a woman in red. She drew herself. Smiling. Standing. Bandit was beside her. Tail up. Tongue out. And behind them the sky full of stars. But one star was bigger than the rest. She labeled it in small cursive letters. Mom. 6 months later, Paige Ramirez stood on the stage of Haven Ridge Elementary's auditorium. Hands slightly trembling. Heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't wearing a costume. No mask. No crutches. And for the first time in her young life, she wasn't pretending to be someone else. Just to survive. This time she was seen completely. And entirely as herself. The school was hosting its annual Voices of Courage event. A new tradition started. In response to Paige's story, students were encouraged to share poems, stories, or experiences that had helped shape their sense of bravery. Paige had signed up last minute. No one pressured her. No one expected her to speak. But she wanted to. She needed to. She stepped up to the microphone and looked out into the sea of faces. Her classmates. Her teachers. Hannah seated in the front row. And of course, Bandit sitting calmly at Sophie's feet. Near the stage stairs. Watching with eyes that had seen every part of her journey. Paige took a breath. And then she began. A year ago, I was quiet all the time. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because no one ever asked me to speak. I used to think I was invisible. But then someone barked for me. A dog, a hero, a friend. He didn't use words. But he heard the ones I kept buried. He told people I needed help. Even when I didn't know how to ask. Now I use my voice. Not just for me. But for kids like me. If someone is quiet, it doesn't mean they're okay. Sometimes silence is the loudest cry. The audience was still. A deep, reverent stillness. Then came the applause. Loud. Tearful. Full of warmth. Bandit barked once. Just once. As if to say, "That's my girl." Paige came off the stage. And went straight into Sophie's arms. "You did it," Sophie whispered. "I was terrified," Paige replied. Face buried in her shoulder. "But you stood anyway," Sophie said. "That's what makes it brave." A few weeks later, the White House announced a National Recognition Award for K-9 Bandit. The Service K-9 Medal of Honor. It was given to dogs who had made extraordinary contributions to justice, safety, and lives saved. The ceremony was held in D.C. And they flew Paige, Hannah, Sophie, and of course, Bandit to attend. The event was grand. Flags waving. Press cameras flashing. Dignitaries giving speeches. But the moment that mattered most wasn't on camera. It was when Paige walked onto the national stage, placed a paw print medal on Bandit's vest, and whispered, "You saved my voice." And in that moment, Bandit looked up at her. Not wagging. Not barking. Just watching. With the quiet, steady loyalty that had carried her through her darkest days. By fall, Paige had started writing a children's book. With Hannah's help. It was called The Dog Who Heard Me. It wasn't just her story. It was the story of any kid who had been silenced, isolated, or unseen. Each page was illustrated in soft watercolor. And every chapter ended with a simple truth. Even if you whisper, someone out there is listening. The book was published by Winter. And started spreading. Libraries. Shelters. Schools. And soon letters began arriving. Letters from other kids. I thought I was the only one. Your book helped me tell my mom. I think I'm ready to talk now. Paige read every single one. And cried every single time. One cold December night. Hannah, Sophie, and Paige decorated the Christmas tree. In the living room, Bandit lay beside the fireplace, his nose twitching every time Paige moved too fast. With the candy canes, Hannah handed Paige a final ornament. A small painted star. With the word voice written in the center. Paige hung it high on the tree, just above Bandit's head. Then she curled up beside him and whispered, "I didn't just find you, you found me." That evening, Hannah posted a photo of the tree with Paige and Bandit lying side by side beneath it to the channel. The caption read, "This is what happens when we listen. Not with ears, but with heart." A bark changed a life. A child found her voice. And a hero wore fur. Sometimes the smallest sound. The bark that cut through a hallway. The whisper folded in a crayon drawing. The voice that shook behind a microphone. Is the one that changes everything. Because in a world that often overlooks the quietest people, one dog listened. And a girl became more than just heard. She became whole. Now it's your turn. Have you ever overlooked someone who was silent? Thinking they were okay? What would happen if instead of waiting for words, you simply noticed the silence? Let us know in the comments. And never forget. Sometimes heroes don't speak. They bark. Has an animal ever helped you hear a silent plea for help? Let me know your answer in the comment box below.